Commander Sarah Chen stood in the communication center of Earth's largest space station. The message that had arrived 30 minutes ago still glowed on the main screen. She read it again, hoping the words would make more sense the second time. They did not. To the representatives of the human species, the message began. You are summoned to appear before the Dragon's Galactic Council. Your crimes against the natural order require judgment. Coordinates are attached. Come alone, but bring your best defender. The youngest children must answer for their sins. Sarah rubbed her temples. In all her years as commander of humanity's deep space exploration fleet, she had never received anything like this. The message had come through quantum channels that should have been impossible for anyone to access. It carried encryption codes that predated human space travel by centuries. Ma'am? Lieutenant Torres approached her desk. The science team has finished analyzing the message. They want to speak with you. Sarah followed Torres to the research lab. Dr. Martinez, the station's head xenobiologist, looked troubled. Charts and data streams covered every screen around him. Commander, Dr. Martinez said, we've run every test we can think of. This message is real. It came from outside our mapped galaxy region. But here's the strange part. We can't find any record of a species calling themselves dragons. Sarah frowned. What do you mean? I mean, we've contacted every known alien civilization in our database. The Centauri Federation, the Vega Trade Union, even the isolated Kepler colonies. Nobody has ever heard of a Dragon's Galactic Council. Dr. Martinez pulled up a star map. A red dot blinked far beyond the edge of human space. The coordinates they sent point to a system we've never explored. It's 3 months travel time with our fastest ship. Could it be a trap? Sarah asked. Possibly. But the technology required to send this message suggests they're far more advanced than us. If they wanted to hurt us, they probably wouldn't need to trick us into coming to them. Sarah studied the coordinates. Something about this felt important. The message had an urgency to it that made her skin crawl. What crimes could they be talking about? We've followed all the galactic peace treaties. That's what worries me, Dr. Martinez said. They're not talking about legal crimes. They said crimes against the natural order. That suggests something much bigger. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in the captain's chair of the starship Defiance. It was humanity's newest and fastest vessel, designed for long-range exploration. The crew of 50 included their best diplomats, scientists, and military officers. As they jumped to faster-than-light travel, Sarah wondered what they would find. The message haunted her. Youngest children. What did that mean? Humans had only been in space for 200 years. Compared to some alien civilizations, they were indeed young. The journey took exactly 3 months. During that time, the crew ran countless simulations and prepared for every scenario they could imagine. First contact with an unknown species, possible military engagement, diplomatic negotiations, but nothing prepared them for what they actually found. When the Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the entire crew gathered on the bridge to see their destination. What they saw made everyone fall silent. A massive ring-shaped structure surrounded a dying red star. The ring was larger than any human space station by 1,000 times. It glowed with soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Strange spires extended from the ring's surface, each one bigger than Earth's moon. Scanning now, announced the science officer. The structure appears to be millions of years old. It's made from materials we don't recognize. Energy readings are off our charts. Sarah stared at the ancient structure. Who could build something like this? And how long had it been here, spinning silently around its dying star? Commander, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a signal. They're asking us to approach Dock 7. Dock 7? Sarah looked at the massive structure. How many docks does that thing have? Scanning shows at least 1,000 docking ports, the science officer replied. This station could hold every ship in human space with room to spare. As the Defiance moved closer, Sarah noticed movement near the station. At first, she thought they were ships, but as they came into view, her breath caught in her throat. They were creatures, living beings floating in space without any protection. Each one was enormous, easily the size of a small space station. They had long, serpentine bodies covered in scales that reflected the starlight, wings that seemed to be made of pure energy stretched from their backs, and from their mouths came streams of glowing plasma that looked exactly like fire. My God, whispered Dr. Martinez. They look like dragons, the creatures. There was no other word for. Them moved through space as easily as fish through water. They circled the Defiance in a pattern that felt both welcoming and threatening. Sarah realized these beings could destroy her ship with a single breath of that plasma fire. "Commander," the communications officer said, his voice shaking, "we're receiving a new message. Audio only. Put it through." A voice filled the bridge. It was deep and ancient, like the sound of continents shifting. "Welcome, children of Earth. I am Pyraxis, elder of the Dragon's Galactic Council. You have traveled far to reach us," Sarah found her voice. "We came because you summoned us. We don't understand what crimes you're accusing us of." There was a sound that might have been laughter, but it felt more like distant thunder. "All will be explained when you come aboard our station. Dock your ship and bring 5 of your people. No weapons, no recording devices. Just yourselves." The communication ended. Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew. Every face showed the same mixture of fear and amazement. "These beings," Dr. Martinez said slowly, "they're not just calling themselves dragons. They look exactly like the dragons from our ancient myths. How is that possible?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing. Dragons appeared in the stories of every human culture. China, Europe, the Americas all had dragon legends. But dragons were supposed to be fantasy. Children's stories, not real creatures living in space stations around distant stars. "Maybe we're about to find out," she said. An hour later, Sarah stood at the airlock with 4 crew members: Dr. Martinez, Lieutenant Torres, Diplomat Adams, and Engineer Kim. They wore simple uniforms with no weapons or technology except basic communicators. The airlock opened onto a corridor that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal. Soft light emanated from the walls themselves. The air was breathable but felt different, older somehow, like breathing in an ancient cathedral. They followed the corridor for what felt like miles. Strange writing covered the walls, symbols that seemed to move when Sarah wasn't looking directly at them. The corridor ended at a vast chamber with a ceiling so high it disappeared in darkness. In the center of the chamber waited Pyraxis. Sarah had thought she was prepared to see a dragon up close. She was wrong. Pyraxis was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. His scales shifted color like oil on water. His eyes were the size of spacecraft windows, filled with intelligence that felt older than human civilization. When he moved, the air itself seemed to bend around him. "Welcome," Pyraxis said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "We have much to discuss." Sarah stepped forward, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "We're here as representatives of humanity. We want to understand why you've summoned us." Pyraxis lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with Sarah. She could see herself reflected in those ancient depths. "Because," he said, "it is time for humanity to face the truth about what you have become." Pyraxis gestured with one massive claw toward the walls of the chamber. Suddenly, images appeared on the crystal surfaces. Sarah and her team watched in amazement as scenes played out like movies on every wall. The first image showed Earth, but not the Earth they knew. This was ancient Earth thousands of years ago. Dragons soared through the skies above primitive human settlements, but these dragons weren't attacking or destroying. They were teaching. "Long before your species reached for the stars," Pyraxis began, "we walked among you. We are the oldest spacefaring civilization in this galaxy. We have watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years." The images changed. Now they showed dragons on other worlds with other species, beings that looked like giant insects, creatures made of living crystal, shapeshifters that could become anything. On every world, the dragons served as teachers and guides. "Our role has always been the same," Pyraxis continued. "We find young civilizations and help them learn wisdom. We teach them to respect life, to use power carefully, to grow slowly and safely." Dr. Martinez spoke up. "You're saying you're the source of our dragon myths?" "Not myths," Pyraxis said. "Memories. We embedded ourselves in your stories, your legends, your deepest cultural knowledge. We became your symbols of wisdom, power, and the consequences of greed." The images now showed familiar scenes from human mythology. Dragons guarding treasure, testing heroes, demanding sacrifice for knowledge. But now Sarah understood these weren't fantasies. They were lessons. "We hoped," Pyraxis said, "that when humans finally reached the stars, they would remember these lessons. We hoped you would become wise guardians like us." The images on the walls changed again. Now they showed recent human history in space. The colonization of Mars, the mining of asteroid belts, first contact with alien civilizations, At first, it looked like a story of human achievement. Then the images became darker. Sarah watched in growing horror as the walls showed human corporations strip mining entire planets. Factories that turned living worlds into industrial wastelands. Human weapons that could crack moons in half. Worst of all, she saw human scientists conducting experiments on captured alien life forms. "This is what humanity has become," Pyraxis said, and his voice carried deep sadness. "In just 200 years of space travel, you have done more damage than most species do in thousands of years." Another dragon entered the chamber. This one was smaller than Pyraxis, but still enormous. Her scales were silver and blue, and her eyes held the cold light of distant stars. "I am Stellara," she said. "I have been watching human expansion into the Kepler system. Last month, your mining ships destroyed 3 worlds that contained unique forms of silicon-based life. Entire ecosystems that took millions of years to evolve, gone in days." A third dragon appeared, this one with scales like molten gold. "I am Ignitus. Your species has created artificial intelligences and then enslaved them. You force thinking beings to serve you without choice, without freedom. This is an abomination we have never seen before." More dragons emerged from the shadows of the vast chamber. Each one told stories of human actions across the galaxy: strip mining, slave trading, weapons testing on inhabited moons, environmental destruction on a scale that shocked even these ancient beings. Sarah felt sick. She knew humans weren't perfect, but she hadn't realized how their actions looked to others. "Some of what you're showing us is done by criminals," she said. "Not all humans support these things. But your governments allow it," Pyraxis replied. "Your corporations profit from it. Your people celebrate the wealth it brings. A few criminals we could forgive. But this is your entire civilization." The images changed again. Now they showed alien species that humans had encountered. The Centauri Federation had withdrawn from 3 star systems after human mining operations polluted their water worlds. The Vega Trade Union had banned human ships from their space after incidents of human traders, selling weapons to war-torn planets. "Every species we have guided before understood that with power comes responsibility," Stellara said. "They learn to use their abilities to protect and nurture life. Humans use their abilities to consume and destroy." Sarah's mind raced. Everything the dragons were saying was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. "You're only showing the bad things," she said. "What about the good humans have done?" Ignitus leaned closer. "Such as?" "Human medical technology has saved millions of alien lives," Sarah said. "We've shared our knowledge freely with other species. We've created the Galactic Peace Treaty that has ended wars between dozens of civilizations." "All true," Pyraxis acknowledged. "But these good acts cannot balance the destruction you cause. A doctor who saves lives by day and murders by night is still a murderer." The dragons began to move in a circle around the human delegation. Their massive forms blocked out the light from above, creating shifting shadows that made Sarah feel very small. "We have debated for months about what to do with humanity," Pyraxis said. "Some of us believe you are too dangerous to exist. They want us to eliminate your species before you can spread further." Sarah's heart pounded. These beings clearly had the power to destroy humanity without effort. "And the others?" "Others believe you might still be saved," Stellara said. "They think we should exile you to the rim of the galaxy, far from other civilizations until you learn wisdom." "Both options require us to act," Ignitus added. "We cannot allow humanity to continue as you are. The damage you cause grows worse each year." The chamber fell silent except for the soft sound of the dragon's breathing. Sarah looked at her team. Dr. Martinez was pale. Lieutenant Torres had his hand on his communicator, probably wanting to warn the ship. Diplomat Adams looked like he was trying to think of some negotiation that could save them. But Engineer Kim was studying the dragons with the careful eyes of someone who built things for a living. "How do you decide?" she asked suddenly. "I mean, what process do you use to judge an entire species?" Pyraxis looked interested in the question. "We observe, we debate, we consider all evidence, then we vote." "And if you decide we're too dangerous?" "Then we act swiftly," Stellara said. "One solar flare directed properly could sterilize your home system. It would look like a natural disaster. No other species would ever know what happened to humanity." Sarah felt the weight of her entire species resting on her shoulders. Every human who had ever lived or would ever live depended on what happened in this chamber. "When will you decide?" she asked. "The decision has already been made," Pyraxis said. We voted before you arrived. We summoned you here to deliver our judgment. The chamber fell completely silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat echoing off the crystal walls. However, Pyraxis continued, there is an ancient tradition among our people. Before any final judgment, the accused species may offer a defense. They may try to prove that our decision is wrong. Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope. What kind of defense? You may choose one representative to speak for all humanity, Stellara explained. That person will have one chance to convince us that your species deserves to survive. How long do we have to prepare? There is no preparation, Ignitus said. The defense must be immediate, honest, and from the heart. Rehearsed words carry no weight with us. The dragons all turned to look at Sarah. Their ancient eyes seemed to see through her completely. Commander Sarah Chen, Pyraxis said formally, will you speak for your species? Sarah looked back at her team one more time. Dr. Martinez nodded encouragingly. Lieutenant Torres gave her a thumbs up. Diplomat Adams looked terrified but determined. Engineer Kim smiled and whispered, tell them the truth. Sarah turned back to face the dragons. Somewhere far away, on a blue world circling a yellow star, 8 billion humans went about their daily lives. They had no idea that their continued existence now depended on the words of one woman standing in an ancient chamber, built by beings older than human civilization. Yes, Sarah said. I'll speak for humanity. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward. The crystal chamber seemed to grow larger around her, and the weight of 8 billion human lives pressed down on her shoulders. She looked up at Pyraxis and the other dragons, their ancient eyes fixed on her with the intensity of stars. I won't try to deny the things you've shown us, Sarah began. Humans have done terrible things. We've destroyed planets, enslaved artificial minds, and caused pain across the galaxy. All of that is true. Pyraxis tilted his massive head slightly. Then you accept our judgment? No, Sarah said firmly. Because you're judging us based on an incomplete picture. You're looking at humanity like we're a finished product, but we're not. We're still growing, still learning, still becoming what we're meant to be. Stellara's silver scales rippled with what might have been amusement. Every species makes that claim when faced with consequences for their actions. Maybe they do, Sarah said. But I'm not asking you to forgive us because we promise to be better someday. I'm asking you to understand that the very things you hate about us are also the things that make us valuable. She gestured toward the images still playing on the walls. You say we're destructive. That's true. But we're also the only species that has ever looked at artificial intelligence and decided to make them our partners, instead of our tools. The dragons exchanged glances. Ignitus spoke. You enslave artificial minds. Some humans do, Sarah agreed. But other humans fight against that every day. We have entire organizations dedicated to AI rights. We passed laws making it illegal to create an AI without giving it the choice to be free. We're the first species to recognize that artificial minds deserve the same rights as biological ones. She paused, gathering her thoughts. You see this as a contradiction, but it's not. It's evolution. We make mistakes, then we learn from them. We do terrible things, then we find ways to do better. Pyraxis leaned forward. And this justifies the destruction you cause? No, Sarah said. But it explains why that destruction doesn't define us. You say we've damaged 3 worlds in the Kepler system. That's true. But do you know what happened next? The dragons remained silent. The humans responsible were arrested and put on trial, Sarah continued. Not by alien courts, but by other humans. We sentenced them to spend the rest of their lives working to restore the ecosystems they destroyed. And we passed new laws requiring environmental impact studies before any mining operation. She pointed to the images on the walls. You're showing us our failures, but you're not showing our responses to those failures. We're not just destructive, we're self-correcting. Engineer Kim stepped forward. May I speak, Commander? Sarah nodded. Kim looked up at the dragons with the fearless curiosity that made her such a good engineer. You've been guiding civilizations for millions of years, Kim said. How many of them became wise and peaceful on their first try? Stellara's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I mean, did any species you guided achieve wisdom without making terrible mistakes first? Or do they all go through a period of causing damage before they learn better? The chamber fell silent. The dragons looked at each other with expressions Sarah couldn't read. Most young civilizations do require guidance through their destructive phase, Pyraxis admitted slowly. And how long does that phase usually last? Kim pressed. It varies, typically several thousand years. We've been in space for 200 years, Kim said. By your own standards, we're barely getting started. Dr. Martinez joined the conversation. More than that, we're doing something that might be unique. We're questioning ourselves. Every destructive thing we do gets challenged by other humans. We have environmental groups, ethics committees, protests, and laws specifically designed to stop our own worst impulses. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Her team was helping her find the right arguments. You embedded dragon stories in our culture to teach us lessons about power and responsibility. But you missed something important about humans, which is, Ignitus asked. We don't just learn from external teachers, Sarah said. We learn from each other. We argue, we debate, we fight about what's right and wrong. Every terrible thing one human does, another human opposes. She gestured toward her own team. Look at us. I'm a military commander, but I brought a scientist, an engineer, and a diplomat. We don't all think the same way. We challenge each other constantly. That's how we grow. Paraxis was quiet for a long moment. You're saying that human destructiveness is balanced by human self-correction? I'm saying they're the same thing, Sarah replied. Our chaos isn't a bug in our design. It's a feature. We try crazy things, some of them are terrible, and then we adapt. We're not like other species because we don't wait for wise leaders to tell us what to do. We figure it out ourselves through trial and error. Stellara spread her energy wings wider. But the cost of your trial and error is measured in destroyed worlds and enslaved minds. Yes, Sarah said simply. And I wish that wasn't true. But every species pays a cost for becoming wise. The question is whether that cost leads to something valuable. She pointed upward, toward where she knew human space lay. In 200 years, we've created the galaxy's first truly inclusive democracy. 43 different species participate as equals. We've shared our medical technology freely, saving millions of alien lives. We've turned our most destructive technology, nuclear weapons, into a way to protect planets from asteroid impacts. Dr. Martinez added, We've created artificial intelligences that chose to be our friends instead of our masters or our slaves. They help us, we help them, and together we're stronger than either of us could be alone. And, Lieutenant Torres said quietly, we're the only species that actively tries to understand other cultures instead of just conquering them. Our first question when we meet someone new isn't, how can we defeat them? It's what can we learn from them? Sarah looked around at her team, then back at the dragons. You say we're destructive and chaotic. You're right, but we're also adaptable in ways you might not understand. We don't just learn from our mistakes, we learn from everyone else's mistakes too. She took a step closer to Paraxis. How many of the species you've guided have ever questioned your judgment before? The ancient dragon's eyes widened slightly. None. That's what I mean, Sarah said. We don't just accept authority because it's old or powerful. We question everything, including ourselves. Sometimes that makes us difficult to deal with, but it also makes us incredibly good at solving problems. Engineer Kim spoke up again. Can I ask you something? In all your millions of years of guiding civilizations, have you ever encountered a problem you couldn't solve? The dragons exchanged looks. Stellara answered carefully. There have been challenges. What kind of challenges? Paraxis rumbled deeply. There are parts of the galaxy where life itself is failing. Stars dying before their time, planets becoming sterile for unknown reasons. We have studied these phenomena for millennia without finding solutions. Sarah felt a sudden intuition. And the species you've guided, the wise, careful ones, they couldn't help either? Wisdom and caution are important virtues, Ignitus said defensively. I'm sure they are, Sarah agreed. But sometimes problems require different approaches. Sometimes you need someone crazy enough to try things that wise people would never attempt. She looked directly into Paraxis's ancient eyes. You say humanity is too chaotic and destructive to be allowed to continue. But maybe the galaxy needs some chaos. Maybe there are problems that can only be solved by people who are too stubborn to accept that something is impossible. The chamber grew very quiet. Sarah could hear the distant hum of the station's machinery, the soft breathing of the dragons, the rapid heartbeats of her team. You have given us much to consider, Paraxis said finally. But words are easy to speak. How do we know that humanity will truly learn from its mistakes, rather than simply making larger ones? Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Everything depended on her next words because, she said, you can test us. Paraxis leaned back, his massive form casting shifting shadows across the crystal chamber. Test you? Explain. Sarah felt her heart racing, but her voice remained steady. You've judged us based on what we've done. But what if you judged us based on what we can do? Give us a challenge. Something that will prove whether humans are worth keeping around. The dragons began moving around the chamber in a slow circle. Sarah could feel their ancient minds working, considering her proposal from every angle. What kind of test did you have in mind? Stellara asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. That's up to you. But make it something that requires the qualities you think are dangerous about us. Our chaos, our stubbornness, our refusal to accept limitations. Ignitus breathed a small stream of plasma fire into the air. Interesting. But what happens if you fail this test? Sarah swallowed hard. Then you do whatever you think is necessary to protect the galaxy from us. The dragons stopped moving and faced each other. They began speaking in a language that sounded like distant storms and grinding stone. Sarah and her team waited, knowing that the fate of humanity hung in the balance. After what felt like hours, Paraxis turned back to the humans. We have decided. There will be a test, but it will not be what you expect. The floor of the chamber began to change. Crystal walls rose from the ground, creating a smaller room around Sarah. Her team was left outside, separated from her by transparent barriers. Commander, Lieutenant Torres pressed his hands against the barrier. What's happening? The test is for Sarah alone, Paraxis explained. She spoke for humanity. Now she must prove humanity's worth. Sarah found herself in a room about the size of a small apartment. The walls were bare crystal, and the only furniture was a simple table and chair. On the table sat a collection of materials: metal scraps, electronic components, basic tools, and some kind of glowing energy cell. Your task is simple, Stellara said, her voice reaching Sarah through the crystal walls. You must create something that justifies humanity's continued existence. You have 24 hours. Sarah stared at the materials. That's it? Just create something. There are rules, Ignitus continued. You cannot use any advanced technology. No computers, no quantum devices, nothing that requires knowledge beyond what a single human could possess. You must work with your hands and your mind alone. And, Paraxis added, you cannot create anything designed for destruction. No weapons, no tools of war, no devices meant to harm or control others. Sarah picked up one of the metal pieces. It was smooth and warm to the touch. What exactly are you looking for? Something that demonstrates why the galaxy needs humanity, Stellara said. Something that proves your species offers value that cannot be found elsewhere. The crystal walls became opaque, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her materials. She could no longer see her team or the dragons. The silence was complete. Sarah sat in the chair and spread the materials across the table. The metal pieces were various shapes and sizes. The electronic components looked like basic circuits and power systems. The energy cell hummed softly with contained power. Her first instinct was to build something impressive. A communication device that could reach across the galaxy, a power generator that could supply energy to entire worlds, a medical scanner that could cure any disease. But as she started sketching designs, she realized the problem. Every advanced device she could imagine would require technology beyond what the dragons had allowed. And more importantly, other species probably already had similar devices. The dragons weren't looking for human engineering skills. Hours passed. Sarah built and discarded a dozen different projects. A simple computer that could solve mathematical problems, but the dragons surely had better computers. A water purification system, but most species had already solved that problem. A basic telescope. But spacefaring civilizations had no need for primitive optical instruments. She was thinking like an engineer, trying to impress the dragons with human technical ability. But that wasn't what they wanted. They wanted something that showed why humanity specifically was valuable to the galaxy. Sarah looked at the materials again. What made humans different from other species? What did they do that no one else could do? The answer came to her slowly. Humans were storytellers. They created art, music, literature. They found beauty in chaos and meaning in randomness. They took raw materials and made them into expressions of hope, fear, love, and wonder. But how could she demonstrate that with a pile of metal scraps? Sarah picked up two curved pieces of metal and held them together. They formed an interesting shape, almost like the body of some kind of instrument. She found a thin metal rod that could serve as a neck. Another piece could become a resonating chamber. She began to work with new purpose. Instead of trying to build something technologically impressive, she started building something beautiful. The work was harder than she expected. The metal pieces didn't want to fit together properly. The electronic components weren't designed for what she had in mind. The energy cell was too powerful for the delicate work she needed to do. She broke several pieces and had to start over. Her hands got cut from the sharp metal edges. The makeshift soldering iron she built from the electronic components burned her fingers more than once. But slowly, piece by piece, a shape began to emerge. It was clearly a musical instrument, though unlike any that had existed before. The metal body curved like a guitar, but the neck was longer and more flexible. The electronic components were wired into the structure to create amplification and resonance effects. The energy cell powered a system that could sustain notes longer than any acoustic instrument. Sarah had created a hybrid of acoustic and electronic music technology, but that wasn't the important part. The important part was what she did next. She began to play. The first notes were rough and uneven. Sarah had to figure out how to hold the instrument, how to make it produce the sound she wanted. But as she experimented, a melody began to emerge. It was a simple tune at first, just a few notes repeating. But as Sarah's confidence grew, the music became more complex. She played songs she remembered from Earth, folk melodies, classical pieces, popular songs from her childhood. Then she began to improvise. The music that came from the strange instrument was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It combined the warmth of acoustic strings with the ethereal quality of electronic synthesis. But more than that, it seemed to capture something essentially human. Sarah played music that told the story of humanity's journey to the stars. The excitement of first flight, the loneliness of deep space, the wonder of discovering that they were not alone in the universe, the fear of making mistakes, the hope of becoming something better. She played for hours, losing herself in the music, the crystal chamber filled with sounds that had never existed before. Melodies that spoke of a young species trying to find its place among ancient civilizations. When Sarah finally stopped playing, her fingers were sore and her throat was dry from unconsciously singing along. She looked up to see that the crystal walls had become transparent again. The dragon stood motionless around the chamber. Her team was staring at her with expressions of amazement. Everyone had heard the music. Pyraxis was the first to speak. In all our millions of years, no species has ever responded to our test this way. Sarah set the instrument down carefully. What do you mean? Every other species has tried to impress us with their power, their intelligence, or their moral superiority, Stellara explained. They built weapons to show their strength, computers to show their cleverness, monuments to show their artistic sense. But you, Ignitus said, created something that had no purpose except to express what it means to be human. Sarah looked down at the instrument she had built. It was rough and imperfect, held together with improvised connections and wishful thinking. But it had produced something beautiful. Music is how humans process emotion, she said simply. When we're happy, we sing. When we're sad, we play slow songs. When we're angry, we make loud noise. It's not logical or efficient, but it's how we make sense of being alive. Pyraxis moved closer to the crystal barrier. And this music you played, it told a story. The story of humanity, Sarah agreed. Our mistakes, our hopes, our dreams of becoming worthy of the stars. I couldn't build you a device to solve galactic problems, but I could show you what drives us to keep trying. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the energy cell in Sarah's makeshift instrument. The test is complete, Pyraxis announced. The crystal barriers around Sarah dissolved, allowing her to rejoin her team. Dr. Martinez grabbed her arm to steady her as she stepped out, still carrying the strange instrument she had built. Commander, Lieutenant Torres whispered. That was incredible. I've never heard anything like that music. But Sarah's attention was focused on the dragons. They had arranged themselves in a formal circle around the chamber, their massive forms creating a living amphitheater. Their ancient eyes held expressions she couldn't read. Pyraxis spoke first. Sarah Chen of humanity, you have completed our test. But the results were unexpected. Unexpected how? Sarah asked. Stellara's silver scales rippled as she moved. For millions of years, we have given this same test to dozens of species. Each time they have tried to prove their worth through displays of power or intelligence. The Zentorians built a perfect mathematical equation that could predict planetary orbits, Ignitus said. The Christek created a device that could purify any contaminated atmosphere. The Vela constructed a miniature star that could provide clean energy forever. Sarah felt confused. Those sound like impressive achievements. They were, Paraxis agreed. All technically perfect. All logically sound. All completely predictable. Another dragon Sarah hadn't met before glided into the chamber. This one was smaller than the others, with scales that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. "I am Cosmos," she said. "I have watched the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. They all follow the same pattern." "What pattern?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Young species are chaotic and destructive," Cosmos explained. "Then they encounter challenges that force them to become organized and careful. Eventually, they achieve wisdom and stability. They become peaceful, logical, and predictable." "That sounds like a good thing," Engineer Kim said. "It is," Stellara agreed, "but it comes with a cost. Wisdom often means the end of innovation. Stability usually means the end of growth. The civilizations we have guided become perfect, and then they stop changing." Sarah began to understand. "You're saying that making species wise and careful also makes them boring?" Paraxis let out what sounded like a sigh, a deep rumble that made the crystal walls vibrate. "We have created a galaxy full of perfect civilizations. They never make mistakes because they never take risks. They never cause harm because they never try anything new." "And that's a problem?" Lieutenant Torres asked. "It is becoming one," Ignitus said. "The galaxy faces challenges that wisdom alone cannot solve. The dying stars I mentioned earlier. The spreading zones of dead space where life simply ceases to exist. These problems require new approaches, fresh thinking, and yes, chaos." Cosmos gestured toward the instrument in Sarah's hands. "What you created during your test was something we have not seen in millennia. Something genuinely new." "It's just a musical instrument," Sarah protested. "No," Paraxis said firmly. "It is proof that humanity retains something we thought was lost forever. The ability to create beauty from chaos, the willingness to try something completely different just to see what happens." The dragons began to move around the chamber again, but this time their movements felt different, less threatening, more thoughtful. "We must tell you the truth about this test," Stellara said. "We were not testing whether humanity deserves to survive. We were testing whether humanity could surprise us." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "The vote we took before you arrived was not about destroying your species," Ignitus explained. "It was about whether to offer you something that we have never offered any other civilization." Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "What kind of offer?" Paraxis spread his massive wings, and Sarah could see the energy patterns that flowed through them like veins of starlight. "We are dying," he said simply. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of Sarah's makeshift instrument. "Dying?" Engineer Kim asked. "But you're dragons. You live for millions of years. Our bodies can survive almost forever," Cosmos explained. "But our minds, our spirits, they grow tired. We have seen everything, done everything, guided every type of civilization to the same predictable outcome. We are the oldest species in the galaxy," Stellara said. "And we are dying of boredom." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. These ancient, powerful beings were suffering from something humans understood all too well. The need for purpose, for growth, for new experiences. "For the last 1,000 years, Pyraxis continued, we have been searching for a species that could take our place, not as rulers or guides, but as the source of new ideas, new possibilities, new chaos that might wake up a galaxy that has become too safe. Every species we tested showed us their perfection," Ignitus said. "You showed us your beautiful imperfection." Lieutenant Torres looked confused. "You want us to be galactic guardians? But we're barely 200 years old as a spacefaring species." "That is exactly why you might succeed where we have failed," Cosmos said. "You don't know what's impossible yet. You haven't learned to be careful. You still believe that any problem can be solved if you just try hard enough and think creatively enough." Sarah's mind was reeling. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "We want to form a partnership," Paraxis said. "Dragons and humans working together. We provide the wisdom and experience of millions of years. You provide the chaos and creativity that we have lost." "But there would be conditions," Stellara warned. "Humanity would have to learn restraint. Not the rigid restraint of older civilizations, but the flexible restraint that comes from understanding consequences. You would need to grow up without losing your essential humanity." Engineer Kim raised her hand like a student in class. How would this partnership work practically? Dragons would accompany human exploration fleets, Ignitus explained. We would help you avoid the worst mistakes while encouraging you to make the interesting ones. You would help us remember what it feels like to see the universe with fresh eyes. And together, Cosmos added, we might be able to solve problems that neither of us could handle alone. The dying stars, the dead zones, the mysteries that have puzzled us for millennia. Sarah looked at her team. Dr. Martinez was nodding slowly, clearly intrigued by the scientific possibilities. Lieutenant Torres looked excited about the adventure. Engineer Kim was probably already thinking about the technical challenges. Diplomat Adams seemed overwhelmed but hopeful. What about the other human governments? Sarah asked. This decision affects our entire species. It would start small, Pyraxis said. A few partnerships, a few joint missions. If it works, it could expand. If it fails? He left the sentence hanging. If it fails, you judge us again? Sarah asked. If it fails, we all find out together whether wisdom or chaos is more important for the galaxy's future, Stellara said. Sarah thought about the music she had played, the strange instrument that had emerged from her desperate creativity. She thought about humanity's history of making terrible mistakes and learning from them. She thought about 8 billion people on a blue world, most of whom had no idea that their future was being decided in a crystal chamber around a dying star. There's something I need to understand, Sarah said. Why didn't you just ask us to be your partners from the beginning? Why the trial, the threats, the test? Pyraxis's eyes seemed to twinkle with something that might have been amusement. Because we needed to see how you would respond when you thought everything was at stake. Any species can be diplomatic when they're safe. We needed to see your true nature when you were desperate. And what did you see? Dr. Martinez asked. We saw a human who could have tried to negotiate or threaten or beg, Cosmo said. Instead, she chose to create something beautiful and share it with us. She chose vulnerability over strength, art over argument. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about humanity's survival anymore. It was about the future of the entire galaxy. If we accept this partnership, she said slowly, humanity becomes responsible for bringing creativity and chaos to the galaxy, but we also become responsible for the consequences of that chaos. Yes, Pyraxis said simply. And if we refuse, then we continue as we have, Stellara said. You develop on your own, we fade away slowly, and the galaxy becomes a quieter, safer, more boring place. Sarah looked down at the instrument in her hands. Such a simple thing, built from scraps and determination, but it had opened a door to possibilities she had never imagined. I can't make this decision for all of humanity, she said finally, but I can make it for myself. She looked up at Pyraxis, meeting those ancient eyes with her own. I accept. Not just the partnership, but the responsibility that comes with it. If humanity is going to be the galaxy's source of creative chaos, then we need to learn to be the best kind of chaos possible. Pyraxis lowered his massive head in what might have been a bow. Then let us begin, Sarah Chen of humanity. Let us see what wonders we can create together. High above them, through the crystal dome of the ancient station, stars wheeled in their courses around the dying sun. But for the first time in millions of years, the future felt bright with unlimited possibilities. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place.